Hi, and welcome to an RPM Telco webinar. Today we're going to be talking about reconciliation. Actually, this is going to be the first webinar of two webinars that are going to be discussing reconciliation as a whole in RPM Telco. So this one is primarily going to be focused on how Reconcile works currently in RPM, whereas the next webinar, part two, is going to be focused on the future of reconciliation in RPM, the new features that you're expecting or we're expecting to build out, as well as any feedback, requests for features that can also come with that webinar. And we'll kind of go over the aspects of it more in detail in the second webinar. And this one, again, is just going to be focused completely on reconciliation as it is in RPM currently. And we're going to be talking about what it is, kind of how to set it up, how to use it, and then the full kind of soup to nuts methodology of using the reconciliation either monthly or kind of the work you got to put in day to day. We'll be talking about reconciling from even if you're using RPM just for commissions, you're using it, and you're using a CRM to track your orders and stuff, how to reconcile from that perspective, whether you want to push commissions from RPM into your CRM or push your CRM order data into RPM. We'll kind of cover it in this webinar. So so we're going to be going over all the usage of it first, like kind of how to set it up, the usage of actually using the feature in RPM, what that's required, and then we're going to be talking about Reconcile as a whole, and then we're going to be going over very briefly what to expect in the next webinar. So if you're not interested in reconciling as it is currently, or if you are not interested or you're already using it and you don't really need a refresher, then this webinar is not really for you, and you should catch the second webinar, which talks about what we're going to do to improve the feature set and valuable kind of build outs and requests and things like that we're going to focus on for the reconciliation in the future. So if this webinar sounds interesting to you, please give it a watch, even if you're not overly interested in it because you feel like the new reconciliation features are just around the corner. I still recommend maybe giving this one a watch just to kind of get into the mindset of how Reconcile is going to be tackled by RPM. And we're also going to be talking about some key things that always come up regardless of what tools you use in terms of reconciliation. And if you have any specific examples that you don't think is covered by this webinar, please reach out to us at support@rpmtelco.com. But also, please watch the webinar in its entirety. I know this one's going to be a long one, so if you want to just send those questions in, feel free to do so. Anything like that is totally fine. But we'll jump into here and get started right away. We've gathered over the years, and just as the industry changes, we have seen that the reconciliation feature in RPM hasn't really kept up with it. So we're looking to improve it from there. But once it just boils down to the reconciliation in RPM, it just boils down to no matter what, we need some way to match your commissions to your orders. And it'd be awesome if we could find a way that works automatically, but we can't really, unfortunately. No matter what, you need some sort of identifier on your order and some sort of identifier on your commission items. And with like the introduction of like AI and things like that, we could get a little smarter or more, I guess, smarter in the sense that we're going to make things match a little more fuzzy. So instead of relying on like a unique identifier, like account number, we're going to be maybe looking at things like, hey, we can take the customer name and it's kind of close to this customer name, even though it's spelt 3 letters different because this customer name didn't include INC at the end, or this one had LLC at the end. But we think it's the same customer, and then these account numbers are somewhat similar. They have the same format. Maybe this does belong to this order, or this product is on this order and it's in this item, and things like that. So maybe with the introduction of AI, we can get some fuzzy matching and stuff going. But when it really comes down to it, the only way to guarantee a reconciliation match is through a matching ID between the two systems. I know it's easier said out loud than done in practice, but we'll go over it all in this webinar. And so hopefully that explains the methodology or what RPM views reconciliation as, and then we'll hopefully evolve and grow it together from here. But that's it for what it is. Let's go into setting it up. All right, so jumping right into my RPM here, we're going to be looking at the top left menu, and we're going to be going into processes. So pretty much we're going to be looking at primarily orders, but you can set up reconciliation on any process in RPM. Is typically it's based off of orders just because of that's how kind of telco functions. But if you're curious, you can set it up on other processes. Like for example, if you're using your RPM to track a little more detail, maybe you want to set it up on orders and you want to set it up on your order modifications, or you want to set it up on trouble tickets, commission stuff. But we're going to be talking about all the different settings right now, so I'm going to go from there and see how you want to set it up. But yeah, so we're going to go into the orders process. We're going to go into the setup here, and then we're going to be going to this commissions tab. And then from here, we'll just hit edit under commissions. And the method will either be on none by default or already be set on Reconcile, and you just haven't ever noticed or used it. Or if you're already using Reconcile, then that's totally awesome, but you'll find some settings in here that you didn't know about. Yeah, so you have pretty much three options, with none being not turning it on at all. And then earlier I was referencing the ability to tie it to a trouble ticket or a commission issue. Reference pretty much allows you, if you check this, it pretty much gives you a start option on your commission items or trouble ticket, or it gives you a start button on your commission items, and it'll either start a form and it'll fill in the commission item details onto that form, like MRC, item ID and that stuff, and you can kind of start a trouble ticket or commission inquiry off of a commission item that you have a concern with. But it's not used too much. It's pretty much when you have a commission inquiry, sometimes it's more than just one item. You want to do it on an entire account. So reference is okay as an option it's better than nothing, because your agents can start forms on an account anyways, and this just gives them an additional ability to start a form on a specific item if they have a question about a specific item. So if you're sharing your RPM with agents and stuff like that, reference is a cool option. You can try turning on and just seeing if anyone uses it. But the star of the show here is Reconcile, the ability to reconcile multiple items to your orders. So we're going to give that a check. Okay, and then once you do that, you'll have a Reconcile setup button here. You'll give that a click, and it'll take you into the Reconcile settings screen. Now there's a lot of components to this screen, so we're going to kind of start from the top left and work our way all the way to the right and then bottom here. Kind of drag columns over, so we kind of got a good flow going for the settings. So the very first thing we want to tackle is the Reconcile settings themselves. If we give that an edit, you'll have the ability to change things like the statuses that are affected, as well as when you want to start reconciling. So maybe you have a lot of like old commission data that you don't really want to be part of your reconciling process. You just want to start like in the most recent months and set it from there. I'll have every single commission run you have ever loaded into your RPM in here. So yeah, you can select the earliest. If you just want to do everything, it defaults to the earliest run description. But maybe you just want to reconcile things from like 2023 forward and not worry about older commission items. You can set that as well. But from here, the status levels reflect all of the different statuses on your order form, or order process, or process itself. So typically you wouldn't want all of these to be selected. You would only want the status levels that you would be considered an order is, say, commissioning or billable. You don't want orders to be considered for reconciliation that are, for example, just signed and you know for sure they're not going to get commissioned in a while, or orders that are canceled or they're on hold and you're not getting commissions for them anyways. Adding them to your reconciliation report just makes things confusing. It's just extra data that you know is going to be incorrect, so you don't really need to include it in your reconcile report, right? So you just want to uncheck all the status levels where your order is being worked on, or you know it's not commissioning pending things. So I'm just going to leave it on these 5 here, but your status levels are going to be completely different. It's going to be based upon what you have set up in your RPM. And then include archive forms here allows you to include orders that are archived. Now, typically, I wouldn't say that you'd want this checked to yes, because usually you should be using your archive for orders that are no longer needed to be looked at. So things that are disconnected, or they renewed and it's an old order and you started a new order to replace the renewed order. So if you're using archive to kind of just store old orders that are still commissioning, I wouldn't say that's a good use of your archive forms. But in case that does happen and you want to include reconciliation for archive forms, or if you just want to reconcile from the beginning of time to now, you can do that. I think suppliers have a time limit on when you can make commission inquiries and things like that. So it doesn't really always come into play here. We'll just leave this on no for the sake of this demo, but if you wanted to, you can include archived form. Now, compared values is kind of the most important part of reconciliation. You can actually leave it on no, and what this will do is just tell you if your order has a matching commissioning account that is associated with the reconcile if you leave it on no. But if you check it to yes, this is where you can kind of start getting a lot more value out of RPM's reconciliation. It can actually compare the total net build of all of the items under an account number and compare it to the net build of your orders in your RPM. So what you have to do here is select the item value you want to use. In most cases, you're doing net build, but you also have the option to do things like gross commission, so the amount you're receiving, sales com. If you want to check how much you're paying out on all of the items, this gets a lot more complicated because then you have to do the calculations in both your orders and in your commission side. So typically we wouldn't recommend doing sales comp, but it's definitely an option. And yeah, so you also have, after the item value, you have the money field, which is the money field in your RPM, and you can actually select whichever money field or formula field in your RPM orders. So this kind of gives you the flexibility to say, hey, if you're using like order mods, for example, which if you don't know what order mods is, there's a separate webinar for order mods that you can watch that kind of allows you to relate multiple orders together. And order modifications uses a formula field, which is shown here, total order MRC, to combine all those different modifications into one order. So it gives you a added up MRC of every active order that you have. So this is a formula field, but if you're just doing nice and simple one order to one account setup, you can do order MRC and or original MRC or whatever MRC field you have on your order and compare the two values. So to simplify it, item value is the commissioning amount for your account or your items, commission items under your account that you're comparing, and money field is the money field on your order or on your process form that you're comparing to the commissioning account. And we'll kind of talk about how those things are related in a little bit here, but pretty much you're just telling RPM, hey, I want to compare my net build to my MRC, or I want to compare how much I'm receiving with my gross commissions. Yeah. So the tolerance is the ability to tell RPM, hey, I don't care if it's 1% off, totally fine. Let's just not worry about it. So tolerance is pretty much the ability to tell RPM, hey, if it's within this criteria or this commission value range, I don't want it to show up on my reconciliation report as incorrect. I'm totally fine with it being like 1 cent off or 1% off. And you have the ability to select either a dollar value for this or a percentile value. So 1% tolerance just means that if I have $1,000, if it's $10 off from 1,000, or I'm expecting 1,000 and it's $10 off, like I'm getting 990, don't worry about it. Just tell me it's correct. It's totally fine. Maybe a rounding error, for an example. But if you want to say 1% of like 100,000 is a lot of money, right? So you want to say, oh, I want a tolerance of anything that's $1. You can set it to a dollar value. And I know this is probably going to come up, so I'm going to tackle it now. Yeah, I wish you could select both percentile and dollar amount and set different values for both, because you get into like weird things where 1% is totally fine for things that I'm billing $10, but 1% is not fine for things that I'm billing like $500,000 for. But on the other side of the spectrum, 1% is way too little for something that's billing like $1. I want to be able to set a cent amount or something like that for your tolerance. So that is an improvement that is going to come for sure in the future, but for now it's just the 1% option. So yeah, those are all the settings there on Reconcile settings. And then we got to talk about the settings on the condition side. And this is kind of where it all comes together. So the conditions on the right here are the settings that are telling RPM, hey, I am comparing my commissions to these fields on my orders. So RPM can't just take your commissions and match them to your orders through magic or however automation works without the ability to find some kind of key identifiers. And you might have heard like IDs or unique IDs, key identifiers, things like that all the time. And it kind of stands true here. We need some way to match your commissioning items to your orders. And it sounds easy just saying it like that, but once you actually start looking at your order data and your commissioning data, you'll find that it's very, very difficult to find the match without a clean, unique identifier between the two commission items in your orders. In most cases, we usually use whatever the supplier or TSD provides as the account number. Usually that's the most consistent field. It's not always the case. Some suppliers might give you like just a order ID for their account number, or they'll give you a customer ID, which is even worse for your account number. And all of a sudden you have like 100 orders linked up to one customer ID, and then you have 100 accounts that really should be 100 separate accounts all tied to this one identifier, and it's impossible to really reconcile because you have 100 orders and 100 accounts that are, or 100 orders in one account that really should be kind of 100 separate accounts and things like that. But yeah, but currently as it stands, RPM requires these 5 fields: the rep, the customer, the agency, the supplier, and then the account number. I'll hit edit here. And it'll require the account number by supplier. So by default, these will kind of all be checked no. And you'll just give this yes check. And I'll select the first account reference field automatically for you, just because RPM is usually working off of that as a default. But if you wanted to, you can change it based off of a whatever account reference or text field in your order or form. Typically, you would just leave an account number, but for example, if 8x8, you know that you want to match the supplier, you know that 8x8 always gives you the account number by supplier number. You can change it to this text field here instead as an example, or just leave it as account number because it'll come in as that account number. But kind of the option to switch it to a text field is just the ability to kind of get ahead of the reconciliation matching, if that makes sense. If you leave it on account number and you don't, it's the first time this account has ever commissioned, you're not going to be able to have it on your order yet, right? Because you don't know what the account number is going to be until it commissions for you and you get the account number. But if you know that 8x8, the supplier always just gives you the order number as the account number, you can, 1, pre-create the account number in RPM, or 2, put it as a text field in your orders and then select it here to use it as a reconciliation option going forward. So when it actually commissions, you don't have to go and like find the account reference and then put it on your order. You can just leave it on this text field, and if the text field matches with the account number for 8x8 exactly, then it'll reconcile, and you don't have to worry about going back into that order and selecting the account number reference. But yeah, so pretty much you need 5 of these fields here. So rep name, again, rep name, customer, agency, supplier, and account. And all 5 of them have to match with a commissioning account number in your RPM subscription in order for it to reconcile. And if you clicked on these drop downs, you'll just get all the different rep references, customer references, agency references, supplier references in your order process here. But typically you'd have 1 for all of them. That might not always be the case. It depends on your RPM subscription and how you have it set up, but just know whatever you select in here for your fields is what's going to be used to match with your commissions. All right, so I hit OK, and that's pretty much the conditions. So conditions, again, super important. You want to make sure that everything here is kind of set up. If you have a supplier not selected, so sorry, I'll go back in here, and you have a supplier set to no, you'll find that when you go to reconcile, it just won't because you have the supplier set to no. So this can also be used to say, oh, Lumen things are just way too complicated. I don't want them to show up in my order reconciliation at all. I want to focus on the orders that I can actually reconcile. This is a good way to just select the suppliers that are doable, right? Because sometimes it's better to reconcile some orders than reconcile no orders whatsoever. So just kind of use this selector here to tackle things that make sense. Like, oh, I know that AT&T, okay, well, maybe not AT&T is a bad example, but maybe this fake supplier, multi-supplier, is really good about their orders and their commission namings, and I want to just reconcile their orders. Leave that on yes and just check everything else to no and only focus on reconciling a portion of your orders instead of all of them. So yeah, that's just one tip I wanted to cover before I moved on there. The last thing on this page is columns. So if I give columns an edit, this is what will show up in your reconcile report, and we'll come back in here later to add columns that I think are really useful. But for now, this is just the ability to kind of like a custom view. You can add fields from your orders, you can add fields from your commissions, and kind of see all of it in one report. Now, I know some people's eyes might light up when I say you can add fields from your commissions into this report. You can only add fields from your commissions if they reconcile correctly to your orders. So before you just jump in here and try to make a nice commission and orders report, the commission fields in here completely rely on your ability to get your order matched up to a billing commission number. And also, it doesn't have any, like, it doesn't bring over the basic variables of your commission items and things like that. It's just the totals that are reconciled. So yeah, I just want to make sure that everyone's clear on that before you jump in here and try to make any crazy reports. But yeah, so jumping out of this is kind of what the reconcile page looks like after you set up all of those commission rules. And you have to kind of click reconcile in order to sort the things into these three buckets here. You'll have three buckets: no match, incorrect, and correct. So correct is pretty self-explanatory. It's when all five of those criteria meet and your item totals is turned on. It's going to compare the order MRC against your selected item total value. And it's going to tell you if it's within the tolerance, it'll show up in this correct bucket. So this is the good bucket. We want most things to fall under here. And then the next bucket is incorrect, where it does match, but maybe your order actually didn't get paid this month because the account didn't get commissioned, or it's just off by a certain percentage that's over your tolerance. It'll show up in your incorrect bucket. And then finally, the no match bucket, which has all of our orders in here currently, because I haven't ran the reconcile yet, was just going to show you, hey, these are all of the orders that have 5 of the criterias that, or don't have 5 of the criterias, or they do have 5 of the criterias, but you haven't ran the reconcile yet, and they don't fall into any of these buckets yet. So before I jump into getting this all set up, I want to take a brief break here to go over what we're going to talk about next, set up the stage for that, and then jump into it from there. All right, now that we talked about setting up Reconcile, jump to here, let's talk about how to use the reconciliation. So going into my RPM demo here. So now that we have it all set up, we'll just go back to our processes. We'll go into our process that Reconcile was set up on, and we'll click Reconcile at the top here. Now, another way to get there actually is you go to the top left menu, you go to Commissions, you can go into the Reconcile here on the left, give it a click, and that'll actually list every single reconcile you have set up. So if you had more than one process set up for that, it'll show up there. But yeah, now, so we have everything in our reconcile in our no match box right now because we haven't ran it yet. And what this will do is actually show you the list of orders that are being considered. So if you remember the setup, we only check certain status levels in order for them to show up in here. So once we hit reconcile at top left here, it will take your latest closed commission data and kind of use that as the current last difference or difference, and then the last difference will be your next closed commission run. So it kind of waits for you to actually load some data in and then run some reports here. So I hit reconcile, which then sorted all of my orders into the correct and incorrect and no match buckets. So you'll notice that at a glance here, we'll have the reconcile columns on the right, items total, and then the last items total. So that kind of corresponds with those columns that we had set up, where it's net build this run is matching to the items total, and then net build previous run will be the last items total. Then you'll have your little difference box there, and then last difference between the two. So everything incorrect should probably not have any difference to them because it's correct. You might see some due to the tolerance being set up. So if anything was just a little bit off but didn't over or exceed the tolerance amount, then you won't see any difference. So correct is pretty self-explanatory. Everything in here will match the MRC to the net build of your account total. So what Reconcile does is it'll take all of those commission items under this account number, tally them together, and then compare it to your total order MRC. So what that means is you don't really get a good in-depth look of every single line item, line by line reconciling. So RPM's reconcile is always doing the total value of the order compared to the total value of the account number, which means that you may have to set up the way you track orders a little differently from how you would just put them in to whatever system. There could be, it's pretty much you have to align your order tracking kind of with how each of the carriers provide you their account number, right? So for example, Lumen here gave you a separate account number for each line item or each bundle of things that you sold with them, and you'd make an order for each of those bundles and then kind of track them like that, assuming you wanted to use RPM's reconcile as it is today. Which can be a little cumbersome and things like that, so definitely kind of keep that in mind when you're looking to build out reconciling and making sure that it fits. Maybe it doesn't make sense for every supplier, but maybe you can tackle some suppliers' orders that does make sense. Like, oh, we know Lumen always gives us the account numbers in a way that makes sense with how we're tracking our orders. So let's just reconcile our Lumen orders so that we can at least make sure that we're keeping on top of that. So correct is very self-explanatory there, and then incorrect will be the ones that are just completely off from what you're expecting. So you'll see net build previous run here of 20,000, but we're expecting an MRC of 40,000. So we have a difference of 20,000. So that shows up in the incorrect bucket because it's so far off the tolerance that we need to get it looked at and kind of went through. So this one's kind of the same. We were expecting 1,000, we got nothing. That kind of brings me into the reconcile is always looking at it 2 months at a time, but what shows up in the incorrect bucket will be the ones with the latest difference, right? Like the current this run compared to the items total currently. So the incorrect is a good way to see at a glance what's wrong. You definitely still have to look through every single one of them, and maybe some of them aren't exactly wrong. Like let's say this order 39 here, instead of it being incorrect, we just know that this order only pays when the customer pays, and they're not going to pay every month. It's like every third month or something like that. Then it's going to show up in your incorrect bucket multiple times before it switches over to the correct once you get that payment. And so then you also have no match here, which is kind of the last thing and the most complicated part of the reconcile tool. Is you'll run into a whole bunch of these no matches, and you kind of have to investigate why they're a no match, because if you recall, RPM is matching your orders to the account numbers using these 5 criteria here: customer name, agency, rep, carrier, account number. So if something's off with this, for example, like let's say this order here just doesn't have an account number, that's an easy solution on why it's a no match. Your order is in the commissioning or expecting commissioning stage, but it still doesn't have an account number yet. So you can kind of take this as a call to action, is one way to think about it. This order is expected to bill this month, but I don't have an account number for it yet. So let me go look through my new account numbers and see if I can find a match from Comcast under this customer, for example. But something more complicated is or things that will also show up in here is accounts that just haven't ever billed. So if an account number has just not commissioned ever in your RPM commission history, then it will match no items because the reconcile in RPM is ultimately looking to match your commission items to an order by those 5 criterias. So if an account number has never commissioned, has no commission items in RPM, it can't be matched to an order. So you'll have those show up in your no match report as well. So an easy way to spot this is if all 5 of these match on the account number level. So if I gave this a click to pop into the account number, you'll see that the customer name, 8x8, the carrier, the supplier, customer name, agent assigned to it, or there isn't one because there's no items yet. And if we go back to the order here, we can also see that the carrier is incorrect. So maybe, or swapped over. Sorry, I clicked on this. So it swapped over here by 8, and then the assignment's not there because if we go into commission history, we can confirm that this account has never billed before. So that's why that's in here. Same with this. Oh, this one's actually an 8x8 account number. This carrier here needs to be edited. So this order needs to be went into here, and you got to make sure those 5 fields match, right? So you'd have to go and change this to 8x8. And this can happen when your account number is set to a customer parent, right? Because the account number doesn't use both the customer and the carrier on your orders. So you can select whatever account number you want as long as it's matching to the customer. Then the carrier could be incorrect on the order itself, which can cause some issues. I'll make sure to look for that. So yeah, so that's kind of the no match things, and there'll be a whole bunch of different reasons, but that's a really good spot to start with, is just making sure that, hey, my customer name, agency, rep, carrier, and account number all match with the account number that is attached to the order. So easy way to check is to just give the account number a click, look at the values here, AT&T, customers Apple Locks. This is the rep assigned to it. Go back a page, or even just open the account number in a new tab and just look at it side by side. See that you're missing the agency names. It should have been Solaire. That should have been filled in. And then when you run the reconcile again, it will look through it and rematch it based on those criteria. And then finally, the last thing, if all 5 of those match, if your account number just hasn't commissioned yet, that's also a reason why it would stay in the no match criteria. It just means that, hey, your account number hasn't billed yet, so there's no commission item to match. Yeah. So the final thing is this conflicts thing at the top here. The conflicts is quite dreaded. Unfortunately, you might run your reconcile and you'll see a huge number of conflicts. It could be like 2,000. It could be something crazy. You definitely don't want to see that, but I'll kind of explain why it happens. And it's quite a lot of work to avoid it if you have like thousands of them. But so conflicts happen when you have multiple orders that have the same account number. So both my 0047 here and my 0493, they both have the same account number of these random digits. So the same with these 3 here. So the conflicts could be multiple orders. It could be more than 3, it could be more than 2. You could have something like 12 orders with the same account number, and it just be a huge conflict warning. Unfortunately, resolving it isn't really the best solution. So you can come in here, click resolve, and what RPM will ask you to do is choose the order that you want to reconcile against. So assign every item under this account number to one order, which ideally you probably don't have your orders set up like that. You have all of these multiple orders. You probably have it set up so that each one of them represents their own separate MRC, and what you really want to do is combine the 3 of them into one order to reconcile against. But unfortunately, RPM is going to make you choose one currently, and this is something we're looking to improve in the future. But for now, we're talking about the current reconcile and the way it works. You have to choose one. So if you have a lot of orders, a lot of conflicts, use and reconcile as it is might not be for you. If you do want to use it, you can look into our orders to order mods webinar that talks about kind of like combining multiple modification or taking multiple orders and turning them into modifications and then flowing them, table filling them back into one order. That kind of lets you reconcile we kind of call it the primary order against all of its like sub orders, like things that happen over time, like renewals, disconnects, adds, changes, things like that, that get all associated with that one order. That the purpose of orders and order mods will let you do that. But yeah, so that's pretty much conflicts. You have to choose one, unfortunately. You can also just leave them in here and ignore the conflicts. They'll just never reconcile, which is another option. So if you wanted to just reconcile those orders that are just a simple one-to-one, that's kind of how the reconcile currently is in RPM. So you have to kind of factor that in with this setup. So yeah, so another thing to cover is the more menu here will let you get to the reconcile setup quickly. So if you built your reconcile report, it's like, oh, I'm missing a field, you can go into more setup, add the field to your reconcile report, and then come back in here. Another important thing is remove matches. The ability to remove matches is if your orders for whatever reason you change your orders and you just want to make sure that they reconcile correctly again. That's what the remove matches is for. And let me break that down a bit. Remove matches pretty much takes all of the commission items in your system that are associated with your orders and just unmatches them. It doesn't change your commissions or anything like that. It doesn't change your totals. It just undoes the matching of the reconcile. And the reason you'd want to do that is, let's say I was to edit an order and I change the account number on the order for whatever reason, but that order was already reconciled to the old account. You changing the order on the account or the account on the order won't unmatch those commission items from the old account to it, which can cause problems with your reconcile, right? Because now you're expecting to look at a different account, but your orders still match the old account number. So anytime you change an account number on an order and you're using a reconcile, a general rule is you should, well, try to avoid changing the account on the order. But if you must, then make sure to remove matches and then run your reconcile again. And that will kind of reconfigure itself to the proper account number on the order. And then finally, the last thing is just run reconcile anytime this says required. It just means it'll grab the most updated data. So when we were fixing my no match there, if I run reconcile again, should drop it, or maybe it didn't drop it, but it will just rerun the reconcile and reconfigure everything, see if anything wrong, and it fixes it. So yeah, so the last thing, the latest run here, so you'll notice it always takes your kind of latest run, so the current run and then the past run. No matter if I was to close this run and then start the next run and then I ran the reconcile again, I guess I can show that, might as well close it. And then we'll start the next run here. Then I was going to go back to commissions, reconcile. And I run the reconcile again. It will just take the differences. So you see items total, last items total. It looks way more blank now, right? Because it always takes the latest 2 runs, even if it's open and then closed. So it's always current run and then next current run or previous run is one way to say it. So yeah, that pretty much covers how to use Reconcile. I'll go into the methodologies. Well, sorry, how to use Reconcile on a basic level, but I'll go over the methodologies, how to kind of tie it all together, because just running Reconcile like this isn't the most helpful kind of tutorial on how to get a good Reconcile going. It really takes way more than this, right? Because we still haven't covered things like, what do I do with my orders? How do I find like new accounts? Hopefully we can lay out a good like cycle or methodology of thinking about Reconcile and get everyone more on track of thinking about Reconcile and setting up your deck in a way to really help you easily dig through all of these orders that you're working so hard to sell. So yeah, I'm going to transition back into my agenda here, and then we'll cover the next thing of all the 4 different methodologies, and I'll take it from there. All right, now we are going to be talking about the methodologies behind reconciling. Now that we talked about the setup and then the usage of the feature itself, we can kind of talk about how to actually theoretically use Reconcile with the rest of your RPM subscription. So these methodologies here aren't exactly listed in like order per se. You can use each one of them kind of whenever you want, but they kind of come together as a whole to empower your Reconcile and kind of just allow you to work it a little easier. So the first one being customer merge, for example, the ability to combine multiple customers into one customer is pretty much the feature. But the reason for it in Reconcile is really important because maybe you have a bunch of orders that come from other systems, especially if you're using like another CRM that you put into your RPM to use the Reconcile tool, and then you come to find out that, hey, if you remember, the customer name is one of the 5 key fields that we use on the matching of account numbers to your orders. And when you put in your orders, the name for the customer name might be different than what the supplier or TSD gives you when you get your commission statement. So that's kind of where the customer merge comes in, is you'll have to align your customer names between what you receive in terms of your commissions and then what you're tracking on your CRM tool. Now, there's a whole bunch of things that go into that, like, do you want to keep it in sync between both systems, like your RPM, and if you're using a secondary CRM, do you want to keep those names in sync when you merge names in RPM? Do you want to also relate that name to same name? Is that even possible in your CRM that you're using? Things like that you have to consider. But the main important thing is, regardless of the name, we need to pretty much create a unique identifier for the customer name. So that's an easy way if you were looking to, say, sync your customer values between one tool and another tool, is instead of just using the name, you can just use an ID number that represents the customer as a whole, and then just use that both in RPM and in your CRM tool. There's one way to look at it. But the feature itself in RPM, customer merge, so we're just going to assume that you're doing everything in RPM, your orders are ported over, your commissions are in RPM. The customer merge methodology is the ability to combine multiple of the same or different, customer names into the same customer name. So I'm going to be jumping into my RPM here to kind of show you. It's going to be at the top left menu here in customers. And then the customer merge feature is found in the more menu here. And then you'll just click merge. And then from here, you'll do name cleanup or location merge. The only real difference between these two is that the location merge will take all of the different naming variations of the customer and create a customer location on top of just combining them together. In most cases, you probably don't need to do that unless you're merging, like, for example, let's say example customer -123 address, and then you're merging it to example customer without the address in it. Maybe you want to keep that address or location name or customer name as a location under the example customer example. So that's an option, but really both of them work. It doesn't have much of a difference between the two options. If you don't want to think about it, or you're tracking your locations in another way, like using a process, for example, just stick with name cleanup because it's a little cleaner. So also, there's a YouTube video here, so if you wanted to watch this without having to watch this whole webinar again, just feel free to go in here and click the customer merge tutorial, and that'll give you like the full step-by-step. So yeah, I'm not going to go too far past here, but pretty much you go next, and then you add a bunch of customers in here that you want to combine. So like, let's say Billy Irish, and then AA, and then whatever, it leaves the master customer here, or primary customer, that is going to be kept after the merge. And you can also add a list, so you can drop a bunch of customer names in here. But for the full details, there's that YouTube video. So that's pretty much customer merge. But rather than discuss how to use the feature, let's talk about why you'd want to do that. So let's say you have a bunch of customers in here, like these two here, and even though they're completely different customer names, let's pretend that they're kind of the same customer name, and I actually want to combine them. And that's when I'd use the merge, because on my orders that I've put into my RPM, it's all called Diamond Diagnostics. And when we go to do the reconcile, if I have orders that are always under Diamond Diagnostics, but when the commissions come in, it comes in under Dewdrop, then we'll have a issue where it won't match, right? Because it's looking for that account number under a specific customer. And if it's on your order as Dewdrop, but your commissions come in for that account number under Diamond Diagnostics, then it'll never match because the customer name doesn't match. So that's when you can kind of take those multiple customers that this affects, or that is affected by this kind of misnaming thing, and you'd want to merge them together to create one primary customer that represents your tracking of it. Yeah, so you could have, let's say, a whole bunch of different variations, and it could be just small variations too, like a comma here, an LLC at the end, or things like that, because suppliers and TSDs sometimes, well, TSDs are also kind of under the whims of the suppliers and how they send their data over. And a lot of data entry happens by human hands. So there could be small spelling mistakes, there could be just extra punctuation that wasn't there the first time you got an order through them, and things like that. So that can create a whole bunch of different variations of the same customer, and that's kind of when you need to use the customer merge feature to combine them. And then that way they'll align when you go to reconcile. So before we move on, there's also one other thing that could happen. You could have a bunch of orders where your sales team or whoever, your management team, project team, they enter these orders in, and they also put small variations in the customer name, maybe because they read it on an email and somebody else typed it incorrectly, or they added a punctuation or whatever happens. Totally normal to happen. So you could have a bunch of orders with just small differences in the customer name, and then when you bring all those orders over into RPM and you have it so that it creates those customers on your import, then you'll have a whole bunch of different customer names again, which will create again the no match issue, where your orders don't match to the exact spelling of the billing account number. So first step, I always say when you're setting up Reconcile, is to make sure that your data is aligned between your commissioning side of RPM and your order side of RPM. So one easy way to do that is on your customer page here, you can build a report that just gives you like lifetime commission totals. So that way you can at a glance see, hey, these customers actually have commissioned in the past. So these are live kind of used customer names. Now, these customer names might not be the name that you want to keep. You could actually want to keep ones that don't have billing in them. Like, let's say this assignment code customer here doesn't have any billing, but I want this to be the primary customer name of AA, for example, which also has no commissions. But yeah, that could happen, right? And you'd want to be able to merge whichever. So the nice thing about customer merge is that when you do the merge, whichever one you keep as a primary, will combine all of the commission history and data into the desired kept name. So that's kind of the power of the customer merge and why it's so important. But yeah, so that's kind of the first methodology. And then I will also talk about orders to commissioning accounts now, which is the main way of doing reconciling, the normal way I showed in the reconciling setup. But before we go over into the other one, I just want to fully cover this one and make sure that we know what we're talking about. Okay, now we're going to be talking about orders to commissioning accounts. So we covered like usage of reconciliation on earlier in the webinar, but instead of talking about those three kind of categories again, we're going to be going over orders, specifically the view itself, rather than reconciling. There's a view in orders that you can kind of create that'll be just helpful in terms of determining, hey, which orders of mine need to still be matched to commissioning accounts, and kind of tackle it from a, hey, these are my orders, what are their commissioning accounts kind of perspective. And then this kind of goes hand in hand with the next methodology, commissioning accounts to orders. So maybe we'll talk about both of them in this one cut here, or maybe we won't, but let's see what we get to. So just going over into my RPM here, we're going to be going to the top left menu, processes, and then we're going to be going into orders. So this methodology kind of covers, hey, I have a bunch of orders. What is their commissioning account number? It is pretty much the simple truth of what we're trying to do. So this is kind of tackling it from a, hey, I closed this order, I want it, I'm expected this to commission at some point in time. What is it commissioning? Is it commissioning even? When is it going to commission? When am I expecting it? That kind of thing. So let's just go into one of my orders here, for example. And then it has, let's assume we have all of the main information we have in here, but instead of it being commissioning right now, let's say it's expected first commissioning. So maybe the first time you load all of your orders in, you just throw it in here and you throw it under the status level, expected first commission. And really what should come with this status level is kind of like an estimation on when you're going to expect this order to commission for the first time. So when you throw all of these orders in here and they haven't commissioned yet, hopefully you can kind of make an estimation based off of like the supplier, for example, or like the TSD. It's like, hey, we know that we installed this order, or it's going to be installed sometime 2 months ago. And then once that's installed, it's going to be activated. And then yada, 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 whatever happens in telco, it's expected to commission this month, maybe like 3 months after you signed it, and or maybe 6 months after you signed it and kind of started to forget about it. But when you first put this order in, you kind of just, from your expertise or from your team's expertise, or even just a wild guess, like, okay, I don't know when it's going to commission, but let me throw it in 6 months out from now and say, let's just check up on this in 6 months. So you don't lose visibility on the things you sign and close, right? So yeah, you throw this in here in October, you hit OK, and then what will actually happen if your RPM is set up to trigger off of like date fields, you can have it just automatically set it to expected first commissioning when this date hits the same month as the month you have in here. So October, it's October now, so it switched my order from whatever it was to expected first commissioning. And then you can kind of work off of a hit list from there, if that makes sense. So let's say I go expected first commissions this month, and let me edit this view so you kind of know what we're working with here. So I just made a view here and I threw in the status of things that are expected first commissions. It doesn't matter which date per se. I know this says this month. You can definitely add a date filter in there for the current month and just work on it that way. Or you can just leave things in this status level and just work off of this list. So we have the MRC of the order. We have like the date field of expected first commissions. What we also want to throw in here is, sorry, not commissions. We want to find the account number reference field, and then we want to throw, say, first run in from the account. So this would be the actual account number assigned to the order. If it has any commission history under it, it'll show up in the first run, right? Because it'll be the first run that it got commission items created under it. And then you can also just throw in net build this run, previous run if you want to. It's definitely not needed, but we'll throw that in here just in case. Hit OK, and then we'll kind of get a report here that shows you if your order has an account number on it. It will show you, hey, the first time this order ever commissioned was this month in your RPM, or the first time this order commissioned was this month in RPM. And what you kind of want to look out for are the ones that, oh, I have an account number already on the order, so I know that it should be commissioning soon, but I didn't get a first run commission date yet, so it's past the expectations. Maybe we need to launch a commission inquiry into it and see why it hasn't commissioned yet. Definitely, if you're expecting commissions back in 2021 and it's 2024, definitely look into it. But yeah, it's probably past the point where you could do anything about it if it was like that. But thankfully, this is a demo. So yeah, that's one really kind of key way, is making sure that your orders, when you put them in, that you know you're expecting commissions on it, so you should be keeping an eye on them, and at the very least have some sort of metric that's like, hey, these orders should have account numbers on them at least 6 months from now, And if it doesn't, then okay, maybe you can wait another 3 months. So maybe you can set like 2 date fields, expected first commission and like last expected first commissions date, or like last potential date for commissions, that kind of thing. So maybe you set one that's like 6 months away, and then you set another one for 12 months. It's like, oh, it still hasn't commissioned in a year, then we definitely have to look into this kind of thing, right? But now you might be hearing that and be like, oh, RPM can tell me when my order commissions. Like, unfortunately, no. Unless you have those 5 matching fields on your order, right? Like the account number, agency name, rep name, carrier, and customer name, which if you have all of those when you put the order in, that's awesome. You're way ahead of the curve in terms of the data gathering that you need. But suppliers sometimes don't give you all of that information right away, right? So maybe they give you everything except for the customer name, or sorry, they give you everything except for the account number. That's most typical, is they'll give you everything, right? Because you signed the order, or your customer signed the order, and then you get all that information, right? Customer name, who sold it, the carrier you're working with. But they don't give you the billing account number yet because you haven't been commissioned. So you have to wait for that. That kind of gets into the other part of this, where you're looking at these orders here. You notice that they don't have account numbers, right? So they don't have account numbers. There's no way there's going to be a first run date in here, and it's past your expected first commission date, and you need to do some sort of research or find some way to either get in contact with the TSD you're working with, or get in contact with the carrier. Like, hey, I closed this order with you. I don't know what the account number is. Can you tell me what it is? And maybe you can download a list by supplier and then send it to them, have them help you out. Of course, including probably more information. Edit the view and add more columns, right? Or whatever CRM you're using, just making sure that you're always on top of your orders that are expected to commission at some point. And really, if you take anything away from this, kind of the best way to do it is just to make sure you set kind of reasonable expectations on your sort of date values that you load into your CRM. Like if you close an order and you don't want to forget about it, maybe just always set a check for 1 year from now. It's like, hey, did this order ever commission, or whatever date range makes sense to you? Did this order ever commission in 8 months? And then if you don't see any like evidence that it commissioned, that's when you kind of want to jump on it and figure it out from there. But yeah, so we're going to move on to the second part of this, commissioning accounts to orders. This is kind of the opposite. Instead of trying to match accounts to, or sorry, where you're trying to match orders to your account numbers that are coming, you're doing the opposite, where you're matching new account numbers that don't have orders matched to them, and you're trying to find where they belong and then kind of work it from there. But yeah, after we talk about that, we'll get into a whole thing about how they all work together and a whole bunch of what ifs and things like that. But yeah, moving on. All right, jumping back into it, we're going to be talking about commissioning accounts to orders. So this is going to be more of a commission perspective, right? Because commissions are your source of truth in terms of what you're getting paid for the current month. So it's also good, or probably I would say even crucial, to tackle it from your commissioning side, or at least your reconciliation from the commissioning side, as well as doing it from your order side, right? Because orders are kind of what you're expected to receive, whereas commissions is actually what you're receiving for the month. So if you're just reconciling from your orders, you're kind of missing half of the picture here. You might get payments that you're not expecting, and then that could end up as a clawback in the future, or it could be just a whole bunch of weird commission issues and things like that. But anyways, hopefully this sort of reconciliation will help you and kind of help diagnose what's going on. So instead of just talking about it, let me jump into my demo here and I can kind of show you what I mean. So from the top left menu, we're going to the accounts view, and it's all going to be doing it from this view here. If you are a semi-newer RPM subscriber, you might have this view built in already. It's called new accounts. But if you don't, just go ahead and add a new view. And what that looks like is, I'll show you here. It's pretty much just 2 filters that limits the items to things that have items in this run, and then excluding things from the previous run. Now, that doesn't always cover every single like account that's new. You might have some in here that just has it that billed like 2 months ago and then just billed this month again, and it'll still show up in this report. But it almost covers every single new account that would show up, or at least it does cover every new account that would show up, but it might also include some older accounts. But after you have this in here, you hit OK. You just need those two filters. And the last check here is you can just look at this runs option and then the first run. Currently, my demo is in June of 2023 as the latest commissioning run, but yours will probably be more up to date in the first run date here. But pretty much you just want to make sure that this says runs 1. And even if it doesn't, maybe you have accounts in here that have more than one run. It just means that they're not new accounts. So you still might want to look over them. But pretty much what you're doing from here is you're also looking at this order column. Sorry, let me just jump back into this view here. So let's get rid of this order column just to show you how to add it. So I'm removing it and then I'm adding it back. So we go to add a column, we go into process, go into order here, and then we're just adding order again. And then if you wanted to, you can also add a few more fields from here. So like process, you can also go back into orders, add like the status and then the expected MRC. This kind of just helps you do a little more research. And you hit OK. And then of course, right, you're going to have orders of 0 because this is a new account and I don't have any orders that are using this account number yet. So that's why it's showing 0. And pretty much what we're doing here is we're trying to reverse that, or not reverse it, but we're trying to fix that in the sense that we're trying to find out where this account number belongs in my orders. So a couple ways to do that is, like, obviously the account isn't going to be assigned to the orders, so clicking on the account and going from there isn't a great idea, but maybe we can do it by like the customer name, for example. We can click the customer name and see if there's any existing orders that don't have an account number on it, and maybe it'll align itself with that account number, and then we can go assigning it there. But pretty much the methodology behind this is that we are looking to make sure that every account that comes into our RPM has a matching order with it at some point in time. And that some point in time is usually when it starts to commission. Right, so this is a new account number, a commissioned by 8x8 under this customer. We should have an order for it. If we don't, we should make an order for it and kind of go from there. So that can really help your reconciliation, right? So when you go into this report, hopefully you don't have like 2,000 accounts without orders attached to them. But maybe you do, and you just have to kind of work through it slowly. It could be a combination of things, so it's really hard to go over all of them in a webinar that's already going to be really long, but you're pretty much going to be looking at things like, oh, does the customer match any customers from my existing order? It's like, oh, I know what this order, or I know what this commission is because I can look into the account here. You can view the item history and kind of break it down from here. It's like, oh, it was a 8x8 deal. Product is this. It was built for this much. Oh, I kind of have memory of what order that should be. But the customer name has a period at the end where when we put the order in, we just did ABC Pest Control Inc. without the period, and we have to merge the customer names. Like, those are a whole bunch of different examples of why you might have a account in here that's not matched to an order, and that's just one of very, very many. But pretty much that is the methodology in terms of you're looking through your accounts list and just making sure that, hey, I got paid on this. Let me make sure that I can relate it to an order, so that everyone in my organization can understand that, hey, this account billed, and whoever is in charge of the order should know that it billed, and kind of work it together from there. But yeah, so that is pretty much it in terms of commissioning accounts to orders. It's really simple at a glance, but when you actually get into it and dig through it, you're gonna run into a lot of like, oh, it's hard to find the order and a whole bunch of things like that. So that's definitely one part of it where I would like to kind of get feedback on. Like, if you actually go into your accounts page and maybe you don't even run the new accounts report, you just look at all of your accounts from all time, and you find that a whole bunch of them don't have orders associated with them, even if they stop billing. Or maybe you ignore the ones that you stop billing. It's like, how hard is it to go through there and actually audit each of your orders? Is it extremely time consuming? And yeah, unfortunately, there's not really a great way to automate it, right? Because you're putting in orders in that might have information missing, right? Because you don't have the account number yet. There's no identifier on your commissions that can match to your orders. But if there are, then we can definitely do things that kind of link those two together. But eventually, you're going to run into a list of a bunch of orders that don't have an easy identifier between your order and your accounts or your commissioning accounts to match it. But yeah, things change over time and it can always be improved. So if you have any ideas or you just want to look through some of your accounts as examples and kind of just work through this with us, we're always more than happy to help over here at RPM. And yeah, that's this methodology. I'm going to go into the very last one on the timing of reconciliation. And yeah, that's it for this methodology. All right, now let's talk about the final methodology in timing. So timing in Reconcile is kind of all over the place currently because the reconciliation tool in RPM doesn't snapshot your reconciliation runs like it does with your commissions. So kind of with, you know, how your commissions, you're always doing it month to month to month. And then every time you close a run, it locks it down and you can't make any changes to it and kind of saves your commission history. So when you change commission rules and you do things like that, it doesn't affect your past months. Whereas Reconcile currently doesn't work that way. So if you were to reconcile in, say, the current month, and then next month you went and changed a whole bunch of information on your orders, and then you run the reconcile again, there's no real way to go back into the previous month and look at what reconciled then and there. So when it comes to timing, the timing of it is kind of really dependent on when it makes the most sense for you to do it on your subscription. But when you do it, you might want to download all of those reconciliation reports. So say you do it after you close your latest commission run, you upload all your commissions, you close it, then it's like, okay, now let's run the reconcile. Here are my totals. And then you'll want to download all of those totals and kind of work it off of your maybe Excel spreadsheets, or just save those spreadsheets that you download from each of the categories like correct, incorrect, and no match, so that you have a snapshot of that information at the current time. That when you go into your next commission run, you load new commission data in and you close the run, you run reconcile, you can kind of compare the two spreadsheets and be like, okay, some of my orders are now from correct to incorrect, or some of my no matches are finally matched, and here are the variances and the differences between those two spreadsheets. And now I know that could be a lot of work because you're taking things out of RPM and then comparing them outside of RPM. So not the most ideal, but just kind of how it goes currently with the reconciliation tool. But yeah, other than that, for things like actually looking through your accounts report, you know, we were just talking about new accounts and accounts without orders matched to them. That kind of always stays the same because accounts are part of the commission side of RPM, right? So they have the commission history and all that stuff. What doesn't happen on those reports is when you take an account and you finally assign it to an order, it doesn't retroactively go like, oh, okay, this is when this account was assigned to the order. It just kind of takes all of the commission history of that account and relates to that order. So for example, let's say in the beginning of the year, January 2023, let's say in that year frame, you have an account that started billing then, but you didn't find out or you didn't match it to an order for 6 months. So sometime in June of 2023, you finally put the account number on an order. And then when you run the reconcile, what will happen is it'll take the current MRC on that order. Let's say it was $1,000, and it'll just associate that, hey, from the beginning of January to June, the $1,000 is how much we're expecting every single month, no matter what. So let's say in January, if you match the account to the order right when it commissioned, back in January, you were only expecting $500 on the order, then you reconcile, then it'd be correct. But since you didn't match the account to an order until June, and then you run the reconcile, it'll show that maybe it's correct now in June, but back in January, it wasn't correct because you were expecting $1,000, right? Because there's no timestamp on your orders for when you're expecting certain amounts. So it's kind of the timing issue with reconciliation. So really, when you're running reconcile, just keep that in mind, in the sense that, hey, whenever you're reconciling, you're always reconciling the current MRC values for your orders. Nothing in the past gets looked at in the sense of your orders history doesn't get looked at. Your commission history does get looked at. It always gets compared to your order MRC, but your order MRC, if it changes in like January to June, it won't be able to track that, or RPM won't be able to track that in the current Reconcile now. So reconciliation timing is really currently the best practice, just to run your Reconcile after your commissions. That way you have the most updated commission totals to run the Reconcile. And then another best practice is just to download those Reconcile reports so that you can go back and look at them. And then when you're looking at your new account reports and things like that, you don't really need to download them because you can always refilter. I do kind of recommend downloading them because adding filters in RPM to target specific months, it's not the hardest thing to do, but it's definitely a little harder than having your spreadsheet just handy and available somewhere in RPM. And yeah, if you want to track those spreadsheets in RPM, you can do that as well. You can just make a process to store those reconciliation spreadsheets on for each commission month. Just have it all in one spot to make it a little easier. But yeah, so that's pretty much it for when to reconcile. Let me just really quickly jump into my RPM demo here and show you what I meant by the report changing. So if I go to accounts here, and let's say, oh, I didn't get to reconcile this month. I want to target 1 month back for my new accounts. What you would do is you'd edit your report and it'll be defaulted to latest and previous run because it's always targeting your most current commission run. But what you can do is manually change it. So latest run would be your most kind of the range of what you want to target. So let's say I want to go back to June 2023 and target that. You would update it with June 2023 here, and then your previous one would always just be 1 month behind June. So we'd do May of 2023, and then that would give us a specific new accounts for June. That makes sense. So if I wanted to say, give me specific accounts for March, you do the same thing. You change this to March, and then you change your previous run filter to February, which is before March, and then hit OK, and then you get your specific targeting for your accounts. And that works for billing variance, as well as missing accounts and things like that as well, if you didn't know that. Because, missing accounts is always just your latest missing accounts, but if you wanted to copy it and then do the same kind of specific month targeting, you can do that. And yeah, get your report. All right, moving on to the very last thing we're going to be talking about is the improvements and future of reconciling. Now, if you sat through this entire webinar, you kind of get the feeling maybe that the Reconcile and RPM is a bit outdated. Currently, there's a lot of what ifs and like scenarios that have come up where it's like, oh, it's kind of hard to get a good Reconcile going because it doesn't really fit the way we're currently tracking orders, or it doesn't really fit the timing, and it just is a lot of work to kind of get to reconcile where we want it to be, and we would prefer it to be like way more automated, or like any sort of feedback that we've kind of heard over the years in terms of reconciliation. But we are looking to improve it and give it a completely fresh coat of paint, as they say, and improve the features where it's lacking and make it so that it actually does fit telco as a whole currently, as it's evolved over the years. But currently, the Reconcile and RPM does have some key points in it that I feel are still very evident in the terms of it still needs to be done no matter what. We can't really get away from it, and that kind of is the methodology of matching orders to commissions. And when it really comes down to it, we're taking data from not the most reliable sources, unfortunately, like suppliers, and we're trying to match them to our order records. And in between the commissioning and when you close the order, there's a whole bunch of human interaction that happens, and a bunch of very common human errors that can happen in between data entry on one stage to data entry on another stage, right? So we're trying to navigate in making this as automated as possible, but when it really comes down to it is if the data doesn't align itself between your commissioning reports and what you have entered on the order, there's not really a way to wizard it to work, unfortunately. But that being said, we can try to find as many variables that match together between what you enter into your RPM on the commission side and what you end up entering into your CRM or RPM on your order side. right? And that could be just better matching in terms of let's find an order ID, let's find a circuit ID that matches, and let's then compare after if a circuit ID matches, let's find out if the MRC or net build of the order and the items under this account match, or if they're close enough that it could kind of be considered a fuzzy match. Is there an address that we can add on to it? We can compare things by a lot more than a very hard set of rules, right? But that's just one part of Reconcile as a whole that needs to be improved on. So there's a lot to talk about in terms of its improvement and its future in RPM. And that's why it's going to be its own webinar. And I don't want to get too far into it currently. But yeah, so look forward to the new reconciliation improvements and future webinar. We're going to be going over all the things we're definitely going to be working on, some things that are on the table that might not be worked on in the first pass through, but will come out as features. And then we'll also be taking feedback after that webinar happens as well, in terms of, I want to see this. Oh, I want to be the first one to demo it. I want to try it out. I want to see if it'll work for us so we can kind of plan for things like that. And I want to make sure my use case is captured in your feature planning and kind of thing. So yeah, thanks for staying for the entirety of this really long webinar. If you did get here by watching the whole thing, if not, then hopefully you catch the next webinar about Reconcile's future. And yeah, thanks again for attending. If you have any questions or anything like that, please feel free to reach out to us at support@rpmtelco.com. And I hope you enjoyed this webinar. Thank you.